So this is something my grandfather said to me before he died, and it was really profound. He said I was 13, and he said, Camille, you are billions of years in the making, and there is no one like you. You have survived slavery, genocide, and disease, and you carry all of your ancestors with you at all times, and you can access them at any time. You are never alone. He said, but your job is to find the thing that you do like no one else can on this planet, and do that in service to each other. My ancestral lands are this Shinnecock, the South Fork of Long Island. My grandfather is of Shinnecock Montaukett descent. We were traditionally a whaling tribe. We are people of the quahog or wampum makers. Of course, now we don't hunt whales, and we actually have a kelp farm. I was, and this is going to sound strange, lucky enough to never live on our tiny reservation that exists in the Hamptons. I don't know if any of you have been to the Hamptons, but you probably drove right past us if you went through Southampton. You might, if you're a golfer, know about Shinnecock Hills Golf Course. Yeah, that's on our stolen land. But, you know, enjoy your golf. A lot of our land, of course, was taken from us, especially when the Long Island Railroad came through and said it was eminent domain. And then, strangely, they didn't seem to need the land, and then mansions appeared on it. So we're starting to get a lot of that land back, especially some of our sacred burial grounds like Sugarloaf Hill. You know, I came from a family that did not have a lot of money, but we were wealthy in other ways. We were wealthy in our resilience, and we were wealthy in our ability to be creative. And so even though I didn't have a lot of new things like clothes and stuff, that wasn't important in our family. And I think it's also important to know that, you know, I came from a family where, as girl children, we were really supported to be assertive and to be leaders and not be taking a back seat or feel like we had to be nice or quiet. And I know that that's not the main story in the U.S. Even today, I think. It wasn't about being pretty, it was about, you know, being beautiful. And being beautiful meant being truly who you were, true to yourself, and figuring out who that was and honoring that. The interesting thing about our tribe is we are matriarchal. That means the women hold the power. And with that, it doesn't mean that the men have no power. It just means that they acknowledge that the women have wisdom and foresight in a way that men will never understand. The things that was really important to my grandparents, especially my grandfather, is he wanted to make sure that his grandchildren understood what it meant to be a good human being. And for him, that meant knowing that we were all interconnected and interrelated. Not just related to you, which I know we all do. We share ancestry, I'm sure of it. We share ancestry, we share DNA with almost every living creature on this planet. And we are all interrelated in that, you know, this water out here has a relationship to us. What happens to that water affects us directly. What happens to the life in that water, and so on. And so my grandfather wasn't just a talker. He would show us, and he would show us by, from an early age, 3 or 4 years old, he would start taking me into the woods around our house, and he would stop and introduce me to each tree. And he would have me put my hands on the tree, and he would say, this is your relative, in the same way that I am your relative, and you must respect it. When you are given this gift of being able to recognize each individual tree, the same way I recognize each of your individual faces, it's a profound thing, and it's very powerful because you never feel lost, you never feel alone, and you never feel separate. So whether it was snowing, sunny, hot, cold, I was made to sit outside for an hour each day. And after an hour, my grandfather would call me into the house and he would say, "What did you see?" And if I was feeling stubborn, I'd be like, "I didn't see anything, Grandpa." He'd say, "Go back outside." And so it was another gift he was giving me, this ability to be still and observe. You might have witnessed that on this trip, me doing some of that. And when, as a child, I'm sorry, I have a little tickly cough. When, as a child, I would observe, for example, a spider building a web or a particular type of cloud, I told my grandfather these details, and he would say, you know, that means no rain this week, or that means rain in 24 hours. And so he was helping me to interpret the signs, not just, to watch things. Things weren't easy in my immediate family because my mother didn't understand my creativity. I was really an odd duckling, and I think that created a lot of frustration for both of us, her and I, to the point where I left home when I was 15, and I was living in New York City, sleeping on friends' couches to make sure that I stayed in school. And I had several jobs that I did. One was working as a New York City bike messenger. One was working in a 1-hour photo lab. And one was working in, like, I don't even know if it exists anymore, like Woolworths. It's sort of like the Target of age long gone by. And so I was taking care of myself. And I didn't have parents really to say, you should do this, and you didn't do well on that test, or, you know, you should think about a career in this, or you have to go to college for that. I had nobody telling me these things in my head. And so I really had the opportunity, one, to figure out what made me happy. And part of what made me happy was, well, three things. One was being outside, one was making things, and the other was traveling. And I knew at 15 that those three things were core to who I was and what I wanted to do. I think my love of photography began as a child. Like, I remember holding the Kodak 110. It was like this rectangle thing. You put cartridges in. It took horrible photos. You had to look through this little viewfinder. And I loved the idea that I was making this image that, you know, we could look at later. But I think because of, you know, being homeless and really just being in survival mode, I never really thought I could be a photographer. Not to mention that there was nobody who looked like me who was saying, you know, you could, you know, this exists. I thought all photographers were just old white guys. And so when I finally, I think I was 32 when the switch came on, where I was like, this is what I want to do. And it wasn't because I saw somebody else. It was finally just like this compulsion, like, I have to do this. I want to use my camera. And this was after 9/11. And because I had worked as a New York bike messenger, I'd deliver parcels to those buildings all the time. So one of the things that happened when I was 15 and left home is the school recognized that I was at risk. And so they put me in an after-school program where they gave me a film camera. This was way before digital. And they took away the manual, which I thought was interesting. They said, you have to figure out how to use this camera. And way before YouTube or Google or anything, right? But they did teach me how to bulk load black and white film and how to use a wet dark rig. And then they said, go out and photograph your experience. And I don't think they realized how much that saved my life, really. It gave me something positive and creative to do in a time when I felt pretty lost and angry. And so, fast forward to 9/11, I have had, these images of myself as a teenager with the World Trade Center as part of my history. And here I'm holding my daughter as the second plane hits, and I realize she'll never know those buildings except for in a photograph or a film. And then I just understood the importance of a photograph as a historic document, as sort of proof of existence. And so 32 is pretty late to finally decide, oh, this is what I want to do. But that's when it happened. And then it's funny because I think the universe loves to give you exactly what you ask for. And I was just asking to show my intention, picking up the camera. The reason I lifted it was because I wanted to show that there was something beautiful about this life and our planet. And the universe goes, well, here's a road for you. And, all these doors started opening that I had never planned but my, my indigenous heritage, my grandfather teaching me all these things as a child. One of the things he said was, if a door opens, go through it. Even if it's not one that you planned, because it may teach you or show you something greater than you could have planned for yourself. And so I did. I often said yes to things, even though it was not in the scope of what I thought I should do, or because it just felt right. And that leads to one thing, leads to another. One day, as I was walking out onto the frozen ice, I had this experience where I was, for the first time, maybe you had this in Antarctica, understanding that this was not some science fiction movie, but this was my planet. That I was standing on my rock in space, and that I was made of the material of this place. Like, I am an earthling. And all of my grandfather's teachings sort of were coming flooding back to me as I was walking on the sea ice. And that really was amazing. It was something that helped me to recognize an important moment. Like, that, how many of us really truly ever acknowledge that we are of this earth? Like, that we are made of this earth, that we are creatures of this. This is our planetary home, in a way that we acknowledge in our daily choices. I think so many of us get caught up in our day-to-day grind that we really forget this fundamental truth that we only have one of these. I had gotten hired. They don't have quite the same position on this ship, but it was called Expedition Photographer, where my job was to document the trip through my eyes, photographically, and most of the time they didn't do anything with a picture, so I was just basically being paid to go to these amazing places and do what I loved, which was all and when the UN announced that climate change was happening, suddenly my phone was ringing. People were asking for the photos. I saw that I had been just, posting freely on the internet, and they all started coming to find me. And in 2006, I won a National Geographic Award, which basically was some money, but more importantly, it was like for Nat Geo, like recognition, which got me on a Russian icebreaker in the far side of Antarctica in the Ross Sea, a really amazing expedition. And on there, from there it just started rolling along. So Nat Geo published my first work in 2007 as part of the water issue. Like, there was a special water issue. And, to go from being a child who had only grown up looking at my grandfather's stacks of Nat Geo that he would never get rid of, to being in it was tremendous, not just for me, but for my entire family. Suddenly, being the odd duckling, I was suddenly doing something where they're like, oh, wow, got their attention. And really, coming from such incredible dysfunction to achieve things like that really changed the dynamics in my family as well. And so I just kept rolling along. You have to have courage. Have courage to write your own story and understand that this is your life, this is your time on the planet, and it's up to you to determine what you want to happen on it in your time. Do you want to? I think a lot of people feel like, oh, I have to. My parents want me to do this. Well, tell your parents to go do that. That's their turn. This is your turn. You get to write your story. And I really don't like it when parents pressure their kids. I know it's out of love and they think they're trying to give them security or safety, but the reality is somewhere down the road that unhappiness is going to get to a breaking point, and they're still going to go towards what makes them happy. So why not do that from the beginning? So my advice is to first figure out what makes you happy and then start doing it. I think that Joseph Campbell quote is so accurate. It is the cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. And so you have to understand and take the time to figure out what are you afraid of and why. Like really why. I think a lot of people don't do things because they have a fear, and they never stop to figure out what that fear is. What is it? Is it fear of, your parents disapproving? Is it fear of failure? Is it fear of success? But you have to figure out what that is and just, acknowledge it. I think sometimes just by acknowledging something, okay, I see you, then it's less powerful. A lot of people will be like, yeah, but how do I do that? And how do I? Well, I think a lot of people get caught up thinking that there's a formula, especially as a photographer. I meet a lot of young photographers who think if I just do A plus B, I'll get to C. And the reality is, again, there is no formula. You can create the career you want. You can be the kind of photographer you want. I'm not saying it's not going to be challenging, but you can do it. There's always a way. And trusting, like my grandfather said, that you have this. This is not an accident. You are here in this moment. And you must honor the fact that you have survived, right? Billions of years to get to this point. And so what are you going to do with that time? It puts it in a whole other scope when you think about it. Like, you didn't just appear. Everything that had to happen to make you just so, that's kind of a magic. And so if you have these gifts, you should be using them and not burying them or suppressing them because you think it's, not what your parents want you to do or, I would just want to remind you to let us figure out how to be a good ancestor. That it doesn't end with us. And whatever that means in your own life, that one thing that you will stand up for and say, not on my watch, I won't see that thing lost. Whether it's a butterfly or a tree or polar bear, an insect, a lichen. Stand up for it, because what you'll find is that if you stand up for it, other people will also, and then you're not alone, and then you have power, because when you aren't alone, you realize that love that you share can make anything possible. So, thank you.